Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hi everybody. I'm going to classify connective tissue. You can see a graph here. Classify the connective tissue. At first, classify the connective tissue in two groups. Embryonic connective tissue, the connective tissues we have in a developing embryo, and the connective tissue in adult connective tissue. And you see some subgroups for each of these classification. But for better understand, let me explain in another way. We said each connective tissue have three components. So let me show in this way. We said we have three components for each connective tissue. The first one said it is cell. The second, this is fiber. And then ground substance. Okay. Different combinations and the density of the cell, fiber, and ground substance produce different kind of connective tissue. At first possibility, we have a connective tissue with equal proportion of all these components. So we have 30% for cell, 33% for fiber, and 33% for gross substance. We call these kind of tissue loose connective tissue. All components have an equal part in this connective tissue. Another possibility, in some connective tissue, the number of the cells is more than of other component. So we just want take a number to show high amount of cells. So I take a 60% for cell, and for the other component equal 20%. I have to say this number just is for learning, it's not real. And 20% for the gross substance. And this kind of connective tissue called mesenchymal tissue, mesenchymal tissue. Oh, it's override. I have to clean it and name them again. Loose for this one, and mesenchymal for this one. Another possibility, we have a high amount of ground substance. In this time, 60%. 60% for ground substance and equal for others. (20) and 20% for cell. This kind of connective tissue called, you see we have a high amount of ground substance, called mucus. or mucosal connective tissue. Mucosal connective tissue. And the last possibility, high amount of fibers, 60% for fibers and equal for cell and gross ground substance. We call this kind of connective tissue dense connective tissue. We call this kind of connective tissue dense. Number of the fibers and in this connective tissue is considerable. So if we have a lot of fibers, we have two states for these fibers. Sometimes they are aligned or parallel and in one directions. Call it regular. Regular connective tissue. And another possibility, we have fibers in the random directions, something like this. Call it irregular. Regular and irregular connective tissue. By this way, we learn five of different connective tissue: dense, regular, and irregular, mucosal, mesenchymal, and loose connective tissue. Let's back to the graph. I have to clean all of these. Back again to this graph. You see we have embryonic connective tissue, mucous, and mesenchymal or mesenchymal connective tissue. Mucous connective tissue, if you remember, have high amount of gross substance. If we have high amount of gross substance, if you remember, this ground substance absorb a lot of water and make a jelly because of the gags and proteoglycans. So one example for this connective tissue called Wharton jelly in the umbilical cord. And mesenchymal also have high amount of cells. These two are the embryonic connective tissue. About the adult connective tissue, the loose, or another name is areolar, is a very delicate connective tissue and equal proportion of the connective tissue components. Then we had dense, regular, and irregular high content of fibers. And the other connective tissue called specialized connective tissue, or sometimes called supporting connective tissue. They have, for example, different matrix. For example, in bone we have a mineralized matrix. In blood we have a liquid extracellular matrix. Or in adipose we have most of the cells are adipose cells. In cartilage we have a spatial extracellular matrix, and reticular we have a lot of reticular fiber. Elastic we have a lot of elastic fibers. These kind of connective tissue are also called specialized connective tissue. They are specialized for performing a special function in our body. Let's see by pictures. You can see two pictures from two connective tissue. These are the nucleus of the cells, nuclei. Here and also in this part, these are nuclei. In which cell, in which picture you can see a lot of cells. Yes, exactly. Here we have a lot of nucleus. So call this connective tissue mesenchymal connective tissue. But here you can see we have a lot of ground substance. We have a lot of distance between the cells. It means this part we have a lot of ground substance, and we don't see any fibers, or we see a little fibers between. For example, these are fibers, and this part all are ground substance, called mucous connective tissue or Wharton jelly. We can see a mucous connective tissue in the vitreous chamber of our eyes, or vitreous humor. You can see it's very like to jelly in our eye. And also the pulp chamber of the young teeth also have this kind of connective tissue in this chamber, in this cavity. And mesenchymal, most of the connective tissue in embryo is mesenchyme. Then this connective tissue converted to the other connective tissue, or other connective tissue is differentiated from this connective tissue in embryo. You see a loose connective tissue, the cells, fibers, and also the light part or white part are ground substance. We said all of component in this connective tissue is equal. In this picture also, you see two kind of connective tissue, loose and dense. If I divided this picture in two parts, in the right side you see loose, and the left side you can see the dense connective tissue. You can see here we have a lot of cells, but this part you see the number of the cells decrease, but number of the fibers increase. And the directions of fibers, for example, here is something like this. This part is in this directions, this part is in this direction, here we have in this direction, and again. So we see we have the fibers in different orientation, in different directions. It means we have a dense, irregular connective tissue. Why we have the fibers in different directions? Because this dense connective tissue is specialized for tolerate for resistance against the stress. So this kind of tissue can tolerate the stress in all directions. But the loose connective tissue without these fibers is a very delicate and flexible connective tissue and cannot tolerate the stress. Usually we have a loose connective tissue under all of epithelium. Immediately after the epithelium we have loose connective tissue. You can see epithelium here. Immediately we have loose, and then we have a dense connective tissue. Again here we have epithelium, then loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. Also again here epithelium, loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. We said in dense connective tissue sometimes we have a parallel fibers. you can see all of the fibers here all in parallel. Let me show some of them. For example, these are the direction of fibers. You can see all of them is one directions, and the direction of fibers also cause the we have a regular arrangement of also the cells between the fibers, again in one directions. We have this kind of connective tissue to tolerate stress just in a one direction, but usually this kind of stress is repeated and also prolonged connective tissue. For example, we have this connective tissue in tendons. The tendons, you know, are always stretched by muscle at time of contractions. So this connective tissue should tolerate and resistance against this stress. Again, the regular dense connective tissue, we said we have this connective tissue in tendon, so that these cells are fibroblasts, what we call in tendon tendinocytes. And see some picture from the tendons. Attach the muscle to the bones, all of the collagen fibers in one directions. Ligament, attach two bones together, dense regular connective tissue. And aponeurosis. Aponeurosis is a sheet-like tendon, attach the muscles together and also sometimes to the bones, but is a flat or sheet-like tendon. All of these examples for a dense regular connective tissue. About the reticular tissue is a kind of loose, between the loose and dense connective tissue, but most of the fibers are reticular fibers. It is again kind of this tissue prepare a framework, network, and also framework for some tissues or organs. For example, here you can see livers and provide a scaffold. I search for this word. It prepare a scaffold for these organs, and the parenchymal cells of these organs also rest on this scaffold. For example, here the liver cell or hepatocyte rest on this scaffold prepared by the reticular tissue. You can see the reticular fibers in this connective tissue, usually prepared as very delicate stroma for some organs. Also, we have a reticular tissue in bone marrow. We have a reticular tissue in lymphoid organs. All of them, you know, have a very delicate connective tissue. And see again the reticular connective tissue. You can see the reticular fiber produced by these cells called reticular cell. In fact, they are a specialized fibroblasts that produce just the reticular fibers. They prepare a scaffold, something like this, with some pores, and these pores are a space filled by a parenchymal cells or the special cells of that organ. For example, in the liver, the hepatocyte fill this space. And also you can see the stained by a silver, you can see the reticular fibers.